walking back statements that upended the world.
The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia.
President Trump is still facing fire from all sides.
I don't think Vladimir Putin interfered in our elections. I know he did.
How does President Trump's former 2016 sparring partner explain the events of the last week? Senator Marco Rubio is here live in moments. Wiretap warrant breaking overnight. The Trump administration disclosing previously secret documents detailing why the FBI believed the Trump campaign was working with the Russians.
There's been such a complete firestorm based on this completely false narrative.
The target of that warrant, Carter Page, will be here exclusively to respond. Next, plus taking on Trump. The president says he knows who he wants to battle for another 4 years.
I dream about Biden.
But is Joe the way to go in 2020? Another potential 2020 challenger, U.S. Marine veteran and Congressman Seth Moulton weighs in. Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is still reeling from that Trump-Putin summit, from the president's attempts to deal with the backlash, and from new disclosures in multiple investigations. Just overnight, the Trump administration released a heavily redacted version of the previously top-secret application for surveillance of Trump campaign foreign policy advisor Carter Page. This is the first time that such a document has ever been made public, and it says, quote, the FBI believes that Page has been collaborating and conspiring with the Russian government, unquote, among many other charges. The warrant itself, of course, has been the subject of a very partisan fight on the House Intelligence Committee, and the president is already claiming victory on Twitter, saying that the released documents, quote, confirm with little doubt that the Department of, quote, Justice and FBI misled the courts. Witch hunt, rigged, a scam. In fact, that tweet itself is misleading. The documents show that the FBI did use material from the Steele dossier, but the FBI disclosed that the person who hired Steele likely was looking for ways to discredit then-candidate Trump. It also noted that Steele had been a reliable source of information in the past. But let's talk to former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page, who joins me now. Let's get to the crux of it, Carter. The FISA application says, quote, the FBI believes that Carter Page has been collaborating and conspiring with the Russian government. There is probable cause that such activities involve or are about to involve violations of the criminal statutes of the United States. The document accuses you of being a, quote, agent of a foreign power. Were you?
Jake, this is so ridiculous. It's just beyond words. You know, it's you're talking about misleading the courts. It's just so misleading going through those 400-plus page documents. You know, where do you even begin? It's literally a complete joke, and it only continues. It's just really sad.
Well, were you ever an agent of a foreign power? Did you ever advise the Kremlin or work with the Kremlin on anything?
Look, Jake, no, I've never been an agent of the foreign power by any stretch of the imagination. You know, I may have, back in the G20 when they were getting ready to do that in St. Petersburg, I might have participated in a few meetings that a lot of people, including people from the Obama administration, were sitting on in Geneva, Paris, etc. But I've never been anywhere near what's being described herein.
But so you have advised the Kremlin in the past. That was 2013, that G20 meeting, I believe.
Look, it was there were experts from around the world talking about energy issues, and I was one of countless you know, myself and a lot of academics and business people who were involved in these various discussion sessions, but it was nothing.
But you did advise the Kremlin. I mean, I just want to make it clear. You did advise the Kremlin back in 2013 or 2012, somewhere in there.
Jake, it's really spin. I mean, I sat in on some meetings, but you know, to call me an advisor, I think is way over the top.
Except in the 2013 letter you wrote, it says, quote, over the past half year, I have had the privilege to serve as an informal advisor to the staff of the Kremlin in preparation for the presidency of the G20 summit next month, where energy issues will be a prominent point on the agenda. That's August 2013. That's yourself calling yourself an informal advisor to the Kremlin.
You know, informal, having some conversations with people. I mean, this is really nothing and just an attempt to distract from the real crimes that are shown in this misleading document. You know, page 8, it says, it talks about disguised propaganda, including the planting of false or misleading articles, which is exactly what this is. So that's kind of the pot calling the kettle black by Mr. Comey and co.
One of the things that's interesting is the documents make it clear that they were relying on information from Christopher Steele, but not only on information from Christopher Steele. It includes a FISA warrant and 3 renewals in which officials of both the Obama administration and the Trump administration over several months assert that you're an agent of a foreign power, and then it was signed off, the FISA application and then 3 renewals, by 4 judges, all of them appointed by Republicans. So this isn't just Christopher Steele or James Comey. This is many, many people over 2 administrations, 4 judges appointed by Republicans over and over, believing that you are an agent of a foreign power. How do you respond to that?
Actually, it would be a good question for them, Jake, is whether they believe that what they did was appropriate now. You know, again, they were misled. And if people are giving them, typically when the Department of Justice is giving a court information, you know, I think it's reasonable for a judge to believe that that's true. Unfortunately, you know, Mr. Berman, Jeffrey Berman, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, has been doing similar things, including a number of false pleadings in my case there. So I'm hoping that Department of Justice will take steps to start correcting the false record in a number of courts. You know, the FISA is just the first part. Let's see what they do in Southern District of New York to try to correct the record.
Most of the FISA application, as you know, has been redacted, the publicly released version, but some of the material in there is there. Let's talk about some of the things in there. It says, quote, the FBI believes Carter Page has been the subject of targeted recruitment by the Russian government, and then it's redacted, and then it says, undermine and influence the outcome of the 2016 U.S. presidential election in violation of U.S. criminal law. It says that the Russians were trying to recruit you. We know you've said that you went to Russia in the summer of 2016 to deliver a commencement address. Is it not a possibility that Russians were trying to recruit you, even if you didn't take the bait? Is that not possible? It seems to me like that would be their job, and you were working for Trump. You'd worked with the Kremlin in the past. That would be a reasonable thing for them to try to do.
It's totally unreasonable, Jake, and it actually speaks to another misleading testimony related to the indictments that Eric Holder and Preet Bharara submitted on January 2015, talking about that prior case. And, you know, a lot of that is incorrect spin. That individual, Mr. Podobny, a young diplomat in New York, I talked with him about my class. You know, we had coffee one time. I met him at a conference at Asia Society. We met once for coffee, and I gave him some of my class notes, you know, that my students at New York University were looking at. And it was in one ear and out the other. He never asked me to do anything. I mean, it's just so preposterous.
Well, let me ask you, you keep saying this is spin, but if you could just directly answer the questions, it would be great.
Sure.
It says the application also says that you, quote, established relationships with Russian government officials, including Russian intelligence officers. You're telling me that they pulled that out of thin air? You have no relationships with Russian government officials? You've already told me and this audience that you were an informal advisor to the Kremlin in 2013. You have relationships with Russian government officials, right?
Well, let's see what they're referring to specifically. You know, as you correctly noted, there's a ton of information that's blacked out. If you read Mr. Clapper and Co.'s DNI report of January 6, 2017, there's a big, long section in there about how RT and Sputnik, you know, these Russian propaganda agencies allegedly were influencing the elections. I mean, now we know that through these documents that the defamatory article of September 23rd, 2016 was used as a central source of this. So really, you know, again, it's another situation of the pot calling the kettle black. And the fact that you have this $500 million plus a year organization, Broadcasting Board of Governors, funding this ridiculous smear campaign.
Well, but Carter, you didn't answer. You have relationships with Russian government officials, true? Yes.
Well, let's see what they're talking about. You know,
I'm just asking you a straight question. Do you have relationships with Russian government officials? I can tell you I don't. But then again, you lived in Russia, you're an academic, you've worked in energy in Russia, you went there in 2016 to speak at a commencement address. Do you have relationships with Russian government officials?
Well, the main one that they're focusing on, Jake, if you read through the full 400-plus pages,
I did.
Are these Mr. Sechin and Mr. Debyekin.
Yeah.
Both of whom I've never met, spoke with, communicated with in my entire life.
You've never spoken, just to make sure the people at home understand, the application says that you spoke with Igor Sechin, who's the president of a Russian energy company and a close associate of Vladimir Putin, and it charges that you two discussed in 2016, quote, prospects for an associated move to lift Ukraine-related Western sanctions against Russia. So you're saying you've never in your life spoken with Igor Sechin?
Never in my life. And, you know, it's really sad. We're talking about election influence campaigns, Jake. Kellyanne Conway had to answer these questions. You know, you had a very good interview with her on September 25th, 2016, asking her about a range of campaign issues. And since it was put on the table 2 days earlier, that Friday, you know, it was a question you brought up, asking about these things. And, you know, Kellyanne was someone who had recently joined the campaign. I never had any relationship, or I've never spoken with her in my life. So, I mean, it's just real misinformation. And, you know, you were very fair in terms of asking the questions, but it really put her on the spot, and it is just really a sad state of affairs with this election interference campaign by the Democrats. You
still haven't answered my question about whether you have any relationship with any Russian government officials. You said that you do not have one with Igor Sechin, and you do not have one. You've never spoken with Debyekin, who is a Russian internal affairs officer, who the FISA document says that Debyekin told you that the Kremlin had compromising material related to Hillary Clinton. You're denying that that happened too?
Totally false. And, you know, again, that's directly from the Dodgy dossier, which was eventually revealed on January 10th of last year. It's just absolutely preposterous.
Did anyone, at any time, any Russian government official, at any time in 2016, talk to you about either lifting the sanctions or compromising material that they claim to have on Hillary Clinton?
On compromising material, not one word. I was hearing about things when you were hearing about things in the mainstream media. You know, look, I mean, when I was there in July of 2016, you know, a few people might have brought it up in passing. But, you know, again, it's a major economic issue. And so, you know, there may have been a loose conversation. I'm very careful in terms of, you know, making sure that there's a clear record. There was nothing in terms of any nefarious behavior.
Okay, so you did discuss the sanctions with individuals in Russia. Did you ever hear from a Russian, not from the media, from a Russian, anything about compromising material about Hillary Clinton?
Never. Yeah.
All right, Carter Page, thank you so much for coming this morning and taking our questions. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jake. Good to see you.
After a week of painful walkbacks and reversals on Russia, are members of the president's own party buying President Trump's explanations? Senator Marco Rubio, one of the biggest Russia hawks in the Senate, is here to respond next. Stay with us. Sir, good to see you. It's been a long time. How you doing? The Republicans are pulling back. Trump's own intelligence chief Dan Coats, at a loss for words when first told that Trump wanted to bring Putin to Washington, had to apologize for what he called his awkward response. Coates said he, quote, in no way meant to be disrespectful or criticize the actions of the president. Here with me to talk about this week in Russia-U.S. relations, President Trump's former campaign rival, Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, member of both the Senate Intelligence and Foreign Relations Committees. Senator, thanks so much for being here. There's a lot to get to, but I do want to ask about this FISA application against Carter Page that was released last night. The president tweeted this morning that the FISA documents, quote, confirm with little doubt that the Department of Justice and FBI misled the courts. Witch hunt rigged, a scam. He also claims that he was, quote, illegally being spied upon for the political gain of crooked Hillary Clinton and the DNC. Is that what the FISA documents?
I have a different view on it. Number one, you know, Carter Page, I'm not claiming that he's James Bond. He's not 007, but he's a guy that even before the campaign, so this is not Trump related, even before the campaign, is a guy that went around the world bragging about his connections in Russia. So they knew who he was before the campaign. Then you see the guy kind of gravitating around a leading campaign. And then other things came up on their screen, and they said, we got to look at this guy. And that's what the FISA application sort of lays out. By the Trump's campaign own admission, Carter Page was not a big player in their campaign. I don't believe that them looking into Carter Page means they were spying on the campaign. I also don't believe it proves anything about collusion or anything like that. I think Carter Page was one of these guys that we never would have heard of him before all of this. But he was a guy that was on their screen even before the campaign. And when he comes into kind of the near orbit of the campaign, they get interested when they put that together with what's happening with Russian interference. And that's why they looked at him. I don't think it's part of any broader plot. The only plot here is the plot to interfere in our elections by the Russians.
So as far as you know, and you're a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the surveillance was justified.
Yeah, I don't think they did anything wrong. I think they went to the court. They got the judges to approve it. They laid out all the information, and there was a lot of reasons unrelated to the dossier for why they wanted to look at Carter Page. And Carter Page was not a key member of the Trump campaign, and the Trump campaign has said that.
Let's turn to the major news this week with Russia. The White House now says plans are in the works to bring Vladimir Putin to the White House for a meeting in the fall. What's your reaction, and do you think if Putin comes to town, he should also come to Capitol Hill?
Well, first of all, let me say, my understanding is the president always wanted to meet with Putin in America first. He didn't want to go to Moscow first. He didn't want a third country first. He didn't want their first meeting to be on the sidelines of some other engagement. And so he agreed to Helsinki, but now he's back to his original plan, which is the first meeting with Putin in his home turf, in the United States, and Trump's home turf. And I think that's what this is about. I don't have any, no one's been tougher on Putin and on interference than I've been, I believe. That said, I don't have a problem with the presidents of the United States interacting with the president of the Russian Federation. They've got a lot of nuclear weapons, and so we do need to interact with them. That is separate from the question of whether or not in those interactions we should be clear-eyed about who Putin is. He's not interested in better relations with the United States. I think he walked away from that a long time ago. He's interested in gaining advantage at our expense and to his benefit. And as long as we go in with a very clear understanding, we can engage him all we want, but not under any illusions.
You have suggested in the past that you think Putin might be responsible for war crimes, not just in Syria.
No, he has been. I know he has.
Okay. Do you have a problem with him coming to the White House? I mean, meeting with the president is one thing, but coming to the White House is another.
Well, I mean, the symbolism of it, I think people could make the argument you've just pointed out. There is no doubt in my mind that Putin has authorized war crimes. He also possesses, between us, 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. The president pointed it out this week. So it's kind of one of those tough situations where he's, if he was a dictator of a third world country, we would treat him one way. Unfortunately, geopolitical reality means we have to engage with a guy like this, but knowing exactly who he is. This is the guy that shot down that Malaysian airliner. This is the guy that invaded Ukraine. This is the guy that took Crimea. This is the guy that murders his political opponents. This is who we're dealing with. And this is the guy that bombs aid convoys in Syria and helps the Syrian regime gas people by covering for him at the United Nations. This is who we are dealing with. Well, as long as we know that,
Does President Trump know that? He calls him very strong, and I mean, I can't imagine you were happy with the way President Trump reacted with Vladimir Putin on that stage.
I don't think it was one of the best moments in the administration. I feel Donald Trump is not, he hasn't, spent his whole life here in D.C. doing all these things. In his mind, as someone who's not a politician, if I can just interact with this guy on a one-on-one basis over time, we might be able to get some things done together. And because he's not a political creature, he doesn't realize that some of these things he does, how it would be portrayed by our allies or by others. Let me say this, our allies in Europe wanted him to meet with Putin. I'm not sure they wanted him potentially to say some of the things he said, but they wanted him to meet with him. But I don't have any doubt that President Trump is aware of the things Vladimir Putin has done. I'm not sure his rhetoric reflects that, but his policies do.
Don't you think you're being remarkably forgiving of President Trump's behavior towards Putin? If a Democratic president had done all those same things, I can't imagine that you wouldn't be really outraged and expressing.
Yeah, I think the difference is I've interacted with Donald Trump for a year and a half, 3.5 years now, including on the campaign. So it gives me some insight into how he gets to these positions. That doesn't mean I don't disagree with the things he says. It doesn't mean I don't continue to work like on the Deter Act to get things done. I'm trying to explain kind of how we get to this point. Ultimately, I look at the policies, and that's what I'm trying to influence. That's what really, at the end of the day, the rhetoric matters. The policies matter even more. And that's why we need the Deter Act. That's why I agree with arming the Ukrainians. Just this very week, we sent additional military aid to Ukraine to defend itself. And so if we keep doing those things, hopefully the rhetoric gets better on it and some of the explanations there. And look, I am concerned about any time you undermine or say at a press conference that you agree with Putin over our intelligence community, and that's why I'm glad he came back the next day and sort of walked that back, because it was important. It's certainly better than the impression that had been left after Helsinki.
Well, you said that words matter, but actions matter more. During his press conference, President Trump said it was a, quote, incredible offer for Russia to cooperate with U.S. investigators on election interference in exchange for Russia being able to interrogate American officials, including former Ambassador Michael McFaul. Now, the White House later rejected the idea, but in her statement rejecting it, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders called it, quote, a proposal that was made in sincerity by President Putin. Does it bother you that this was ever even taken seriously? And then, even when it was rejected, that they thought that Putin was being sincere?
Well, let me say, I don't think it was ever taken seriously. I don't believe they ever were going to do that. Obviously, when
called it an incredible offer.
That's what the president said at the press conference. In terms of within the White House, I don't think that at any point anybody there was ultimately going to say, let's do this, once it was analyzed and looked at. It was a choice of words that he made that I think ultimately were never going to happen. I remember very clearly saying, I believe Wednesday or Thursday morning, they should just categorically rule this out, and they did, and that's good because that should never happen. I mean, it's a sick joke, you know.
I want to play the moment where President Trump appeared to side with Putin over the U.S. intelligence community in Helsinki. Take a listen.
People came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
Now, 27 hours later, after 2 television interviews where he didn't say anything, plus 5 tweets where he didn't say anything, then President Trump, after being told by Pompeo and Pence he needed to clean this up, claimed that he meant to say, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. Do you believe that?
I don't know what to believe about it. I know he said it after, I know what he said, and I don't think it was a good moment for this administration, and I disagree with it. I know he came back the next day and said something to clean that up, and I'm glad that he did it. You know, I'm glad that he cleaned that up because it left, if you watch that video, it leaves the impression that my intelligence community says one thing, Putin says another. I'm siding with Putin, and that was a bad impression to leave behind.
Even when he cleaned it up, he said it was the Russians, although it could have been a lot of people, also a lot of people out there, which is still undermining the idea.
Yeah, look, I don't like the way this was handled throughout the week. I wish it would have gone differently. My job in the U.S. Senate is to push for policies that ensure that no matter what is being said, what actually happens is good for America. And it's not good for America to have any country interfering in our elections, but especially Vladimir Putin, who believes that weakening us is what's going to make him stronger, allowing him, no matter you're a Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. We are America. We should be a little bit territorial about our elections and about our politics. And the idea that another country gets to come in here and pit us against each other, especially Vladimir Putin, is something we should all be against, especially moving forward.
There's nothing that Putin would like more than for the NATO alliance to be weakened, because that is deterrent to his expanding into Europe. Take a listen to what President Trump said to Fox this week about the U.S. agreement to defend NATO members, including its newest member, Montenegro.
Let's say Montenegro, which joined last year, is attacked. Right. Why should my son go to Montenegro to defend it from attack? Why is that?
I understand what you're saying. I've asked the same question. They're very aggressive people. They may get aggressive. And congratulations, you're in World War III.
Do you have confidence that President Trump would honor the NATO Article 5 agreement?
I do.
An attack on one is an attack on all?
I do. I have confidence that he would. Obviously, when you see those statements, it kind of raises concern. And here's what I would say and will say to the president and have said to his administration, and most people in the administration clearly understand this. Number one, we don't have to worry about Montenegro being aggressive because the NATO alliance is a defensive agreement. It doesn't mean Montenegro can start a war and now we're obligated to join them. It means that they are attacked. We have an alliance in which we defend ourselves. The second point is, I agree with something he said, and that is we don't want a war over Montenegro. And the best way to avoid a war over Montenegro or Poland or any country in the region covered under the NATO alliance is to have a strong NATO alliance. And a strong NATO alliance means two things: a strong commitment to live up to the words of the alliance, which is what some people are concerned about when it comes to the president, but also strong capacity, meaning all of our partners are strong and can contribute to that alliance and our mutual self-defense, which is what the president is concerned about and administrations before him have been concerned about. And so but ultimately what we need to understand is the reason why we didn't have World War III, one of the main reasons why we didn't, is because of a strong NATO alliance. Strong alliances prevent wars, not cause them.
I want to ask you one more question about Russia, and then I know there are a couple other issues you want to discuss. And that is, you have in your career been a voice of moral authority when it comes to foreign policy, whether you're talking about Russia or you're talking about China or you're talking about Cuba. Do you think that you risk undermining that moral authority by pulling your punches when it comes to criticizing President Trump? No, because we have. When the president does something right, we support it. When he does something wrong, we try to change his mind or influence the decisions. And if that doesn't work, then we'll line up against it. So, as an example, months ago, despite what the president has said or his feelings about, in the president's view, my take on it is
that he views any sort of admission of Russian interference as admission of collusion. And I'm just telling everybody, it is very possible. Russia was going to interfere in our elections, whether they were going to collude or not. The collusion issue, I've never seen any evidence of it. There are other people working on that. What I think is indisputable is that they did interfere and will do so again in the future. Hence the Deter Act, which says if you do it again, here are the penalties that are going to be imposed on you automatically. Well, and if 30 days after the election, if our bill passes and the Director of National Intelligence says they interfered in 2018, these very tough sanctions are going to hit them. So Putin knows going in what the price of doing so is. And that's what we need to focus on. And so when I disagree with the president, I'm going to say it. I will be fair. There are times that people out there that think that because I disagree with the president on Russia, now I got to vote against the Supreme Court nominee. I mean, that's absurd. We have to be in a place where we can agree with people when we agree and disagree when we disagree.
I want to talk about what's happening in Nicaragua because that's an issue you obviously feel very passionately about. Human rights groups say hundreds of people have been killed during clashes between the government and anti-government protesters. You tweeted yesterday, after Ortega Murillo's reign of terror, there is no future for them in power. Strong U.S. reaction is coming. They will pay a big price for their crimes against their own people. I strongly advise Nicaraguan military not to participate in oppressing the people. Right. What are you talking about when you say strong U.S. reaction is coming?
Well, I think you're going to see, and there's already work being done to set a series of sanctions against individuals and entities in Nicaragua that have empowered this. You know, all this could have been avoided weeks ago. The message to the Nicaraguan regime under Ortega was very clear, and that is, you know, you call early elections, you allow legitimate elections, and this thing can move forward, and everyone's going to be fine. But if you soak your hands in blood, all that's off the table. They decided to soak their hands in blood. Right now, the military has not been a part of it. He's had to rely on these irregular paramilitary forces that he has stood up in the police departments to kill people. He's basically tried to burn down the university and has now waged war, attacked churches and kidnapping people and the like. So I think that opportunity is now gone for Ortega. And this is an old man. This is a dying man in Ortega. His wife is crazy. She's a lunatic. She's also the vice president of the country. There's no future for them in power. And my biggest fear about Nicaragua is, unlike Venezuela, the possibility of a civil war in Nicaragua is real. It would trigger a migratory crisis. It would undermine our anti-drug efforts in the region. There is a direct national security interest for the United States in seeing democracy and stability in Nicaragua.
One last question, sir. The president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, is under criminal investigation. It was revealed on Friday that the FBI has obtained tapes, including Cohen's private conversations with President Trump. There's speculation that the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York is looking at the tapes to see whether or not President Trump himself did anything illegal or anything worth investigating. Are you concerned at all about what might be on these tapes?
I haven't heard them. I don't know what's on the tapes. So I can't make an opinion on tapes I've never heard. You know, we'll find out. Right?
All right. Senator Marco Rubio, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Don't be a stranger. It's been too long to get to this table.
We'll be back.
President Trump knows his dream opponent in 2020, but will he get his wish? A rising star on the Democratic side will be here to weigh in next. Trump won't tell anyone, including apparently the top intelligence official in the country, what he said, what he may have agreed to with Vladimir Putin. Democrats are now looking to that U.S. interpreter to testify about what was said, though some leading Republicans have shot down that idea. This comes as Democrats are trying to find the right strategy and the right candidate to battle the brawler with the bully pulpit. Joining me now, someone getting a little of that 2020 buzz, former U.S. Marine officer and Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, there's been bipartisan criticism of the president's dealings with Putin and his foreign policy trip this week. Some criticism from Democrats has been pretty extraordinary. I want you to take a look at this tweet from Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. It says, quote, Republicans in Congress cannot continue to turn a blind eye toward the very real possibility that Vladimir Putin has compromised our commander-in-chief and turned him, perhaps without his knowledge, into a Russian asset. Do you agree with that, Congressman?
Well, I think the problem is that we just don't know, Jake. And that's what's so embarrassing about this situation. I don't know of a time in American history when an American commander-in-chief has gone into a one-on-one meeting with an adversary and refused to tell us about it, refused to even tell his own intelligence chiefs about what he discussed. So this raises an awful lot of questions about what Russia may have on Trump and what Trump is trying to do with Putin.
So you think it's possible that the president is a Russian asset with or without his knowledge?
Well, I'm just saying that I don't know. But the behavior that I saw from the president on television, rather than standing up for our allies, rather than hammering Putin for the way that he's tried to influence our elections and undermine our democracy, and instead just cozies up to this dictator. Russia's the greatest enemy of the United States for the last 65 years. the fact that we have to question the integrity, the honesty, and the loyalty of a commander-in-chief when it comes to dealing with Russia is a problem in and of itself. And that's why we've got to elect a new generation of leaders in November to hold this president and this administration accountable.
Amid all the wildness of last week, there are also additional questions, obviously in the president's mind, about what role the United States should play in the NATO alliance and whether or not NATO is an outdated model in a world where the Soviet Union no longer exists. I want you to take a listen to the president in an interview this week about the NATO ally Montenegro.
They're very aggressive people. They make it aggressive. And congratulations, you're in World War III. We're not only are we paying for most of it, but they weren't even paying, and we're protecting them. Add that to your little equation on Montenegro.
Now, you're someone that could have theoretically, as a Marine, been called to defend a NATO ally, not Montenegro, which just joined in 2017, but other smaller countries. How do you view these comments?
When I served in Iraq, Jake, I served under General Mattis, who's now, of course, the Secretary of Defense. And our division motto was no better friends, no worse enemy than the United States Marine. That means that there is no better friend for our allies than America, and no worse enemy. And that should be our policy towards NATO as our friends and towards Russia as our adversary. I understand that we have a commander-in-chief who, dodged the draft 5 times to avoid serving himself. But the fact that he's saying these things about Montenegro just shows how totally out of touch he is with foreign policy. I mean, Montenegro has 2,000 troops. The fact that we would abandon them to Russia because we're going to try to start World War III is ridiculous. But more to the point, we need a commander-in-chief who actually stands with our allies, who actually strengthens the NATO alliance. Senator Rubio is right. A strong NATO alliance is what will prevent us from going to war. And don't make any mistake about it. Putin is trying to undermine NATO. He's trying to influence the West, and that seems to be exactly what he's doing through our own commander-in-chief.
I want to turn to your outspoken push for new leadership in the House. Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic leader, was asked specifically about your call and Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio's call for a new generation to lead the Democratic Party. She responded in an interview with Rolling Stone magazine by saying this, quote, "Inconsequential, they don't have a following in our caucus, none." Is she right?
Well, Tim Ryan ran against her. He had an entire week, 1 week to campaign, and a third of the caucus voted for him. So I don't think that's inconsequential. But you know what? This is bigger than one person. What we need is a new generation of leadership to be honest about the problems that we face. A lot of Americans are hurting. A lot of Americans are working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And we need a leader who's going to talk about the future, not bring us back to the past, but talk about the future. Be honest about the fact that a lot of Americans are losing jobs not to immigrants, but to automation. Be willing to be strong on national security, to create a country that's strong and safe, and someone who's willing to reform government, someone who has a vision for the future. We need a uniter in our party. We can continue to have these narrow and divisive politics with our current leaders, or we can find leaders who are going to really bring us together, who are going to unite us and put us in a position where we can create a majority.
Are you that leader, Congressman?
Jake, I've said very clearly that I'm not challenging Leader Pelosi. But I am going to talk about the kind of leadership that we need. And I've been out across the country recruiting especially young veterans to run. There are many more who have decided to run on their own, and I've been anxious to support their campaigns. I took a group of them down to the border recently. And, rather than go down there and do a 6-hour trip with a press conference, we spent 2 days. 2 days on both sides of the border, trying to understand the crisis so that we can actually come to Washington with solutions. These candidates were avoiding the advice of their campaign, consultants and everything, who said they should be just spending all their time raising money, and are actually trying to understand a big crisis of the day. We went to Juarez, Mexico. We met with deported veterans, a term that shouldn't even exist. We met with a guy who was in the United States Navy, had come to the United States as a kid. His entire family, his parents, his kids were legal residents. He just didn't get around to filling out his immigration paperwork, and when he got out after 10 years in the Navy, he got a DUI. He got a DUI, something that many of my colleagues in Congress have. And because of that DUI, they deported him despite his 10 years of service for the country. So we met with people like that to try to understand this problem. And I think that's the kind of attitude, the can-do, get on the ground, get into the weeds, understand the issues, attitude that you're going to see from this new generation of leaders that I and others in the Congress have been supporting.
Someone else that thinks she's a part of a new generation of leaders, Democratic congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, hit the campaign trail with Senator Bernie Sanders this weekend in Kansas. She says her platform, which includes universal jobs guarantee, forgiveness of all student loan debt, abolishing ICE, represents the future of the Democratic Party. Do you agree?
Well, I think that she has an important voice in the Democratic Party, but the reality is that if we're going to be a majority party, if we're actually going to win in November, we've got to have a diversity of views. And I think that's one of the things that's made our party strong in the past. But if we become narrower, if we become more divided, then you know what? We can do that as Democrats. We're just not going to win. And I think that the stakes are so high in November. The stakes are so high to put a check on this president, to put a check on the administration, to restore some balance in Washington, that we've got to make sure that we have a broad base. And we should have people like Alexandria in our party, but we should also have people like Amy McGrath in Kentucky, this amazing woman who was the first woman to fly an F-A-18 in the Marine Corps in combat. She's running in a tough district that Alexandria couldn't win, but that Amy can. And she's a leader that people will look to and say, I'm going to get behind Amy just because I believe in her leadership, because I trust her judgment, not just because she's a Democrat, but because she's someone who's served her country before and someone we can trust. We need people like that in the party as well.
All right, Congressman Seth Moulton, Democrat of Massachusetts, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jake.
The president, a playmate, the man who made Trump's problems go away, and now a recording. What could Michael Cohen's tapes mean for Donald Trump's presidency? Stay with us.